Hey everybody, welcome to another free tutorial video here at TylerDuprey.com. Today we're going to be creating a fluid width YouTube video that maintains its 16:9 aspect ratio at all viewport width sizes. And so this is a common problem you have when you're trying to embed a YouTube video into your HTML page. You usually have to set a fixed width and height in order for it to have a 16:9 aspect ratio. And if you don't have that 16:9 aspect ratio, then it ends up looking really weird. There's some strange black bars on the top and bottom of your YouTube iframe, and that's no good. So we are going to address that problem here, and we're going to do that thanks to a CSS tricks article that I link below this video on my website. And this is a technique that helps you. It can take any div or any HTML element and make it a 16:9 aspect ratio container, and then we can set our YouTube iframe to be 100% of the height and 100% of the width of that container. And so therefore the YouTube video is always a 16:9 ratio, and it has a fluid width, so you can resize it and put it inside of any container you want. It'll fit inside any page width that your user has. And so it's just a super useful technique that I'm using on my site right now for all my videos. And I really like this technique. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it's really easy too. And so let's just dive in here. I am here on codepin.io. You can create a free account at codepin.io. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a page wrap here to help control our video and display it in the center of the page for the purposes of this demo. And inside of that, I actually want to create a container which is going to control the width. Okay, let's make sure there's not any weird margin on our body. Sometimes you get that. And let's set the page wrap to I'm going to say min height, 100 viewport height, so that it has a minimum of 100 viewport height. And let's center the container on the page, and let's do that by styling its container as a flexbox. And if we set justify content to center and align items to center, it will center that container on the page. And let's just make sure we have inside of our CSS tab, we have prefix free selected, so that we don't have to worry about prefixes right now. The container div, we want this to control the width of the video. So I'm going to have the width be 80%, and I'm going to make sure the width never goes over, like, I don't know, maybe 1,000 pixels for the purposes of this demo, so it doesn't get too wide and too tall. And I'm going to give the min width as well so that it doesn't get too small. And let's see. Let's go ahead and make sure this container is working by giving it a border of 1 pixel solid red so that we can see it. And so this looks like a line, but it's actually a box with no height on it, which is why it's appearing as a line. It is centered on our page, both vertically and horizontally, and it is a fluid width. So this is good. Now we're going to create the video container, and this video container is going to control the 16:9 aspect ratio of our iframe. And so I'm going to give it the class video container. And inside this video container, we're going to put our YouTube iframe that YouTube provides, and we'll do that in a minute. But first, let's style the 16:9 aspect ratio of our container. Now we need a width of 100%, which it is by default, but let's just make sure, so that the video will be this width right here, 100% of this container. And then we also need it to have a height that will cause it to give it that 16:9 aspect ratio. And so if this 100% width is the 16, then we need a height that will be 9, a ratio of 9 compared to that. And so what we want to do is pull up our calculator here and figure out what that ratio is in decimals. And I was just doing this, so I'll redo it here so you guys can see. We want to take 9 divided by 16, and that gives us a decimal of 0.5625, which is a 16 by 9 ratio in decimal form. And if we turn that into a percentage by multiplying it by 100, we'll end up with 56.25. So let's go ahead and do that. So there you go. 56.25% is how tall we want our video to be for every 100% width that it is. And so that's kind of a weird way of saying it, but if the 100% width changes, we want the height to always be 56.25% of that width. And so you would think we could just set a height of 56.25%, right? Well, why didn't that do anything? Well, it's because in order to set a height on a container like this, it needs to be within a container that has a fixed height. But we haven't set a single fixed height. The body doesn't have a fixed height. The page wrap doesn't have a fixed height. In fact, if we do this and just change it to height 100 viewport height, that doesn't work either. Oh, and the reason that didn't work is because we actually need to set the height on the container, and we're just doing this temporarily to make the point. And so, and then we need this height to be 100% of that container. And so this is probably a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. Well, probably not. So as you can see, if you resize the browser, the aspect ratio changes. The width in relation to the height does not stay the same, does it? So they don't both resize. Our width is resizing, but our height is actually staying the same. So this is what we're trying to fix. And so that's not going to work. So, and plus we had, just to get that height to show up, we had to set our page wrap to a fixed height of 100 viewport height. But if there's more content in this page, we don't necessarily want this page wrap to be a fixed height. That's not exactly going to go with all of your layouts. And so let's change that back to min height. Let's get rid of the height attribute completely from the container. We don't need it. And we need this video container to have a 56.25% height. And we know we can't set it here because we just demonstrated that. It's not working. And so what I'm actually going to do is something counterintuitive. I'm going to set the height to 0, just to make sure it's 0. Then I'm going to set the padding top to 56.25%. And there you go. This is a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. You may notice it even looks like a video screen, like a YouTube video ratio. Or, you know, this is the ratio that most HD movies will use. And so if you resize it, see how both the width and the height are resizing, and it's maintaining that 16 by 9 aspect ratio. This is exactly what we're trying to get. And the reason this works, and if you're not familiar with how padding works, we have a height of 0, and the padding adds 56.25% height to that 0 height. Okay, so if this height weren't there, were a different number, it would add to that number. But since it's 0, it's adding exactly 56.25% to the height, which gives the element a total of 56.25% height. So it's just another way to set a height on here in a way that the container actually responds the way we want it to. And so since the height didn't work, this padding top does. And so I'm just trying to explain this to you. If you're not familiar with how padding and height are related to each other, they add on to each other. So if you add padding left or right, top or bottom, it's going to add to the total height of the element. And remember, the total height of the element was 0. So we have a perfect 56.25% perfect 16 by 9 ratio element here. And so now, here's the easy part. We need to come to YouTube and find a video. I found this cool documentary with great power, the Stan Lee story. And it's actually just a short clip from that, but I couldn't find the whole thing. But if you come down here below any YouTube video and you click share, let's hit share there, and then let's hit embed. If we copy this iframe code, and actually we do want to show player controls because we want the people to be able to play it. You can even set a start time if you want it to start at a specific time in the video. We don't need to do that. And I want to just hit this copy button down here, and now this is copied to my clipboard. And I want to paste that iframe in the middle of the div, and I want to set it to be indented. And what I want to do is see how the padding has actually, this 56.25% top padding is actually pushing the video all the way to the bottom of the container, and it's actually overflowing outside of the container, causing these weird scroll bars. We don't want that. So what we want to do is we want to set the container to relative. Oops, that's not how that works. Position relative. And we want to set the iframe inside of the video container to position absolute. And so this falls back to its container, which is set to relative, and or at least it should. And I don't think I did it right. So let me make sure I have this correct. And sometimes you end up with typos here. And let's set the top to 0, left to, there we go. I'm not sure why I had to. It should have been top and left by default. This is why I've always seen developers just, whenever they set something absolute to absolute position, they set the top to 0 and the left to 0, even though that's the default. And I guess that's why. Sometimes it just doesn't want to fall back to that, and so you have to explicitly set it, I guess. And so what this is doing is it's actually maintaining the aspect ratio that is set in the iframe that YouTube gave us. And so let's actually reset that to 100% and 100%. And so now our YouTube video is taking up 100% of the aspect ratio of its container. And as you resize it, you can see it's maintaining that aspect ratio. And we can actually get rid of the red border now. So there you go. This is a fluid width YouTube video that can be at many different sizes. And just to show you, if this were 560 by 315, which is, and if that's a 16:9 aspect ratio, but it's fixed, see how this can't be resized? This is what developers usually have to deal with iframes like this. And so what you'd have to do is you have to set media queries that says, okay, well, when the width gets down to here, we need to resize it. And then when the width changes again down to here, we need to resize it. And it's a really ugly, really tedious way to try to add your videos into the page. And so if we just set this to 100%, we have that fluidity. Now the last thing I'll do is I'll actually set this within the CSS. I don't know why, but I can't help myself but add a little extra insurance that this thing is going to be a width of 100% and a height of 100%. And so this is really cool. We can then begin styling this container element. One time I put a cool box shadow that looked like a kind of like a glowing background, so that it looked almost like a backlit TV. I don't know if you've seen like flat screen TVs with a backlight on it. I actually created one of those. On my website, I created rounded corners. So you can actually have a YouTube iframe with rounded corners, and that's actually really easy. Let me just do that really quick right before we wrap up. Sorry for making this video longer than it needs to be, but it's just fun. So you can set the video container to a border radius of 10 pixels, and you can't see it because the iframe is overflowing that radius, and so you just have to say overflow hidden. And it shouldn't be a semicolon, it should be, there you go. And so now you can see a rounded corners. This isn't a great video for it because what's actually happening here is you can see the video itself has a white border on the left, and so you can't see the rounded corner down there, but you would if you had a background color of something simple, anything but white. And so there you can see the video has a rounded corner here. I don't know why I made it such a light background color. Now you can see it better. And you can see we still have our fluid width. Now you can put this in any container at any viewport size that you want. Okay, so that's a really cool technique. Like I said, I use it on my website now. Check out the CSS tricks article down below. Definitely hit me up on my contact page on my website if you want to see any other tutorials or you have questions about this tutorial. But I hope you guys had fun and happy coding.